There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with Nigerian-Canadian writer living here in Saskatoon, Michael Afenfia, to talk about his new novel, My Bones in Saskatoon. Great title. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
I was at Michael's book launch for this book in April. It's one of the most exciting book launches I've ever been to, and I've been to quite a few. Fabulous bookmark. And here we are all these months later, because I'm such a slowpoke, to talk about the novel. Tell me about the origin story for this novel. How did you get the idea? Where did it come from?
That's a good question. I had just moved to Canada from Nigeria in August of 2019, and I got into Canada with like a lot of expectations in terms of what my life was going to look like what I would do professionally. Sadly, I wasn't one of those people who would say I had done so much research in terms of, what that experience of being an immigrant might look like. I just kind of assumed that when you move into like a new country or come into Canada, whatever was on my resume, was enough to like get me a job. And I also wasn't exactly prepared for some of the other surprises. And they're not always like negative things though, just, culture shock, I would say, of how differently things are done. But I guess something else that really hit me was how disconnected you kind of become from home. And so those were all of the things that sort of drove me into wanting to do this book. And then by the time I started, there's something in Nigeria we refer to as Japa. So, well, the immigration experience is sort of called Japa. It's like a Yoruba word from Nigeria that means like run. So this syndrome of people running away from home because they weren't happy with certain things, or just the standard of quality of life is not to their desire. So there's a lot of conversation on social media, young people just having those conversations about Jakba, like we have to go. And here I had made that move, but I was struggling with certain things. So the idea for the book was not so much to scare people and say think twice, but really be prepared. Like if I had wanted to go somewhere, and I'm the reading type, so of course I would look for a book to prepare myself for this journey. What book would I read? And that was the book I wanted to write.
This is going to be a spoiler-free chat, and some of the things we don't want to spoil happen early in the novel. But tell us about your protagonist, Owoicho.
Yeah, Owoicho, I would say he's like a regular guy, a Nigerian in his 40s, good job, relatively good life, maybe slightly upper middle class, with a little bit of comfort. And in reality, most people who are able to make that move fall into that category, right? Like you have to be on a government scholarship or some corporate scholarship to be able to fund education at whatever level here in Canada. And so even just that transition, if you wanted to apply to be a permanent resident, there's certain requirements, financial, that you must meet, and you should be within a certain income earning range to be able to make that move. So yeah, Owoicho, I would say Owoicho and his family maybe it didn't start that way, but at least we're comfortable at the time they made the move. Works in media.
Anchorman, right? News.
Yes, a news anchor guy. So he would be popular in Nigeria. People would recognize him from TV, being on TV a lot, and married with children. Well, driven, I would say. But still, maybe because of his profession, had certain principles that he lived by,
Yeah.
and found himself here in Canada and had to like navigate. Not found himself here because like he wasn't like stowed away in a ship or something, make that conscious decision
yes.
to be here. But how did that decision pan out for him?
For sure. Without getting into any spoilers, how would you describe the motivation for him and his family to leave Nigeria and come to Canada?
Yeah, so in writing that part of the story, I asked myself, why would anyone leave? Apart from the obvious situations that an average Nigerian might find themselves in, the political instability and all of those things. But writing this book for me was also my way of revisiting my own experiences and my own motivation for being here, because I've also had that question being asked, like, to me as well, like, why did you come here? The direct reason might be looking around you and seeing everybody else is going, and so like what are you waiting for? Like, all your friends have left, your co-workers are leaving. So with the Woicho, that conversation first started when they kind of looked around and like, everybody's leaving, why are we still here? And the reason why everyone is leaving isn't far-fetched, right? Like, they want to give their kids better opportunities, they want better opportunities for themselves. Again, maybe by touching on your first question, or a question you had asked earlier, it's a different experience before you get here, and then when you get here, you realize in your interactions with people that they may not be as like the community you've come into, whether that community was Saskatoon, or it was Winnipeg, or anywhere for that matter. The fact that the community, and when I say community, maybe I'm being overly generalistic, but you would encounter people who don't have a clue what living in another country can look like. So we had this conversation, before we started, and you mentioned living in Japan for 15 years. So I guess, certain realities, you're familiar with certain realities.
Absolutely.
And one of them might be like, if you lived in a big city in Japan and you came here, Saskatoon may be slow for you. And it may seem like really small,
Yes.
But to some people you meet in the community, there's always that perception of, we're doing you a favor being here. Like, there's no way where you're coming from is better. And you get asked a lot of questions like that. So another reason for doing this book, and why I kind of spent considerable amount of time building and painting a picture of their life in Nigeria, was because I'm hoping that some, Canadian-born reader would pause and think for a minute, oh, this is his life. If I met someone in Walmart or Co-op gas station, could this be their experience? Like, could they be medical doctors, lawyers, whatever, big on TV, and they're just kind of starting life here all over again? That too was at the back of my mind. I wanted to paint that picture, that if you've met one newcomer or one immigrant in your community here in Canada, then you haven't met all of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you. So Owoicho is one of the main characters, and I think you'd probably agree with me that the other main character is his daughter Ochanya. Tell us about her.
Yeah, so I'd never really, written about a young character, teenager. When the idea for the book came, I thought, again, just bringing it back to the experience of being new here and the challenges I faced, and being able to look for tools by myself to help me deal with, my transition, being able to talk to people freely about it, having opportunities and places I could go to speak about how, I was feeling, the things I was dealing with. But then I thought, like, okay, I have all these opportunities. What about someone who was younger? Are they even able to process what was going through their, the experience they were having. And so the idea for that character came, just to throw in that perspective, a different point of view, and the perspective of a young person, and how their struggles might manifest, what they might do to even cope with that transition. And yeah, there's a lot about those experiences. And I should say this because maybe your viewers are not just in Canada, but maybe in other places as well. So the experiences in this book may not necessarily be unique to Canada. Yeah,
Right.
but just trying to encompass as much as I can what it might feel like for a young person anywhere, if they move to the UK or they move to the US. How might that change? Just yanking them off from where they were born, where they've lived, to a new place. They have to make friends, they have to learn the language, they have to worry about their accents, and all of that. And then something else, because the decision to move is usually taken by the adults, or the father and the mother, for instance. And the kids are carried along to the extent that they are informed,
Yeah.
that in 6 months' time we're going to this country. But was there like a consultation to say, no, what do you think, Nigeria or Canada?
How old is she at the opening of the story? She's about 16?
About 16.
About
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
She's such a wonderfully drawn character. She's the one that I felt like I knew the best. She just really has a personality, and the relationship between her and Awoicho is really quite touching when you follow it from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. She's got dealing with a lot of things that are probably, they may not be universal, but they sounded like things that I know white Canadian teenage girls go through, and she was already mixed up in some of those things in Nigeria, and that really fleshed out her character, and she's a wonderful character. There's a sense in which Ochanya, she has an easier time of it, the adjustment, than Awoicho to Canada. Or at least her experience is quite different, and becomes more, she connects before he does.
I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe only to the extent that for a younger person at that age, the situations are probably not as multi-dimensional as you might for an older person.
Right.
So she's not worried about work or paying bills, and some of the things that Owecho might be dealing with as an adult. That's not minimizing the experiences young people have in any way, but he's responsible for her. He has to make decisions that are good for them, for the family, and then he has to go out and look for work. He has to deal with this whole fortune reversal, if you will. I mean, going from high to whatever, starting all over again. So to that extent, we see more of his struggles than hers. But of course, when she has to go to school, she has to make new friends. All of that might provide their own set of challenges. Without giving away too much, even just from my own personal experience being a creative, and Ochanya is like a creative, right? So she kind of had an outlet, which is something I hope that I'm able to advocate through the book.
Absolutely.
That look for these outlets, find your inner Michelangelo or whatever, and that can
Achebe.
help. Achebe. And that can help. Yeah.
It was such an eye-opener to hear the discussion at your book launch, because it really opened my eyes. I mean, I was vaguely aware of it, but you and the person that you were having the on-stage conversation with about the situation for immigrants, specifically in Saskatoon. It can generalize to Canada or to other parts of the world, but that most of the crappy jobs in this city are done by immigrants, and particularly non-white immigrants. And that's something you dramatize in the novel. Can you say more about that?
I think it's the illusion, or well, maybe lie is a strong word, but in actual fact, that's what it is, right? It's that lie that you could be anything. You could transplant your life in Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, wherever. You could transport that life and just put it on the soil here and become that person automatically. But that's not true, right? So you come here and there's all these obstacles in your way, right? And for the Canadian systems and regulators, it's standards. They say, oh no, we have these standards, so you have to comply to these standards. But just from my previous reincarnations in places I've worked in Canada, I know the kind of conversations that are going on around mental health, for instance. How much resources the government of Canada is spending dealing with mental health issues. But when we're addressing the symptoms, we're not kind of looking at the cause, the root causes. When a man is a lawyer in his country and has been a lawyer for 20 years, and you make him come here, I don't want to say then they came here. I'm very particular and deliberate in saying you make him come here because you sold something to him. And there's a lot of advertising the Canadian government does for people to come here. And the people land here and they say there's some certification you need, even though you've practiced this profession for 20 years or 30 years or maybe even longer. And so that professional engineer or whatever lands in Canada and they have to sweep the grounds in the Polytechnic.
That's right.
I'm not saying that's a bad job or a crappy job, but that wasn't what you told me, So that's the experience for a good number of people I've spoken with here and just been exposed from other things I have done. That is the experience that people have here. So just think about it for a moment, like the toll it takes on that person to make that adjustment, the resources the Canadian government ends up spending in healthcare, medical care, medication for that individual in the millions when you aggregate the number of individuals you're speaking about, and how those resources could very well have been deployed to tools that would have made that person adjust fit in easier.
Sure. Absolutely.
So like those are things that like really bother me, and I kind of had to express them in the book, right? Like it's a lot, and it's not saying the community isn't welcoming, but maybe there's a systemic problem, and if that systemic problem wasn't addressed, then we're just gonna like keep finding ourselves in the same spot. Whenever you find releases or publications or announcements being made at that level about immigration successes, it's always about job numbers. Those successes are always about, oh, we created X number of jobs, and those are statistics behind. What are the anecdotes supporting this 11,000 jobs?
What kind of jobs?
What kind of jobs are they? Because if you've created 11,000 jobs and only 2% of the people in that number go back to the level that they were,
Right,
or continued in their profession, because the others have to go into nursing, they have to do things that they didn't do in their countries, and a good chunk of them are feeding your retail, manufacturing, and those. I mean, I'm not saying they're not important, but the reason why some of these large retail businesses haven't folded up is because the bodies that keep them afloat are immigrants.
Yeah.
there are parts of the world, and maybe Canada is one of them, where we would have had more COVID deaths if we didn't have the number of immigrants we had working in the health sector. So let's think about these things. And if you want carpenters in Canada, if you want tradesmen or handymen, bring handymen here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, don't convert an award-winning author into one. You get what I mean? Yeah.
In many ways, I think of your novel, Leave My Bones in Saskatoon, as a documentary novel, because there's so much detail about what you're just talking about. And what makes it work, I think, is that the characters and the relationships between the characters complicate all of that and make it a fascinating fictional story. So one of the ways in which you complicate that is that the person that they come and stay with in Saskatoon is a Nigerian, a friend of the family's. Tell us a little bit about her. We won't give away what the complication is, but tell us a little bit about Bimpe?
Bimpe, yeah, correct, Bimpe, yeah. So, yeah, Bimpe and her family have been here much longer than Woicho and his own family. So, in so many ways, they have had that experience. And I'm not going to give away too much,
right,
but I thought this was important to share because I had a conversation with someone very recently, and the person had read Bones and contacted me on LinkedIn, and so we started having this conversation. And so back to Bimpe. Bimpe has a different name. I don't like.
Yes.
Yeah, so Bimpe is called Bree, right?
That's right.
And she shared why she didn't want them calling her by her Nigerian name, Bimpe, but Bree, which sounds, well, Anglo, whatever. So this person who contacted me after reading the book on LinkedIn also has a Nigerian name, a very Nigerian sounding name, but he has an English name as his middle name, which he has on all his legal documents. So he was in Canada for a good number of years and applied to places he thought he was qualified to work and never got a call. This is a true story. Never got a call back in spite of the number of resumes he had sent out. And so he was talking to another friend, and the friend said, look, you have this English sounding name. Why don't you take out your Nigerian name and use that instead on your resumes? And this person I got connected to on LinkedIn told me that the very first resume he sent out with that name, he got called back. And I don't know why. He also doesn't know why, and we don't want to speculate. But
that certainly mirrors the experience of Black Americans.
Yeah.
With African American sounding names, and if they use a different name, they'll get a call back. So it's.
So to think that this was a story I'd written maybe it's 2 years ago, and this person reads it and has a similar experience to share. This is his own lived experience, and I was sharing to you how like even when I wrote the book, at some point I was questioning even my own credentials to do this book. Like, Michael, do you know enough? Have you lived here enough to write this? But the validations, started coming in after the book was published. I'm like, oh, well, these experiences are not far-fetched. They happen, and there are people who have had these experiences. And the sad thing is, people will continue having these experiences.
There are tensions and difficult relationships. There are betrayals. There is a systemic discrimination and challenges for the immigrants in the novel, and it's a very engaging read. So thank you for bringing this book into the world.
Thank you. for reading it.
Tell us about your other books that were published before this.
So this would be my sixth novel.
Oh, you've gotten way more novels than are mentioned here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
My first was in 2010, when the moon caught fire, and then I did a street called Lonely, and that was followed by Don't Die on Wednesday, and then the Mechanics of Yenagoa. I wrote the Mechanics of Yenagoa just before I left Nigeria for Canada, and it was published in 2020. And then Rain Can Never Know. I wrote Rain Can Never Know in Canada when I got here, and it was published in 2022, I think. And then Leave My Bones in Saskatoon was published in 2023.
Tell me a little about this publisher. Is it pronounced Griot's Lounge Publishing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is great, right? One of my concerns leaving Nigeria and moving to Canada was thinking that I would have to sacrifice my writing career. Like, I already had all these books published. I was president or chairman of a local chapter of the equivalent of a writers guild back home. Like, I'd done all these things, and I was moving to a new country, and so I thought like that part of my life was over, and I didn't know what my transition was going to look like, what sort of adjustments I needed to make, what sacrifices I had to make, what had to go, what had to stay. And so I thought like coming here, I probably would never write again or, be published here in Canada. And then just the voice and the style, like we spoke, and I was happy, when you mentioned all of the book, Achebe and Chimamanda Adichie, and all the other Nigerian authors that you have read, but not many people have the opportunity of reading that wide. And so I kind of knew that maybe my voice in terms of being a writer may not be appreciated in this new environment I found myself in. And so my fears about being published in Canada and getting a Canadian publisher, like, will my stories resonate with them? Am I what they're looking for? Would they think I have the audience to say becoming publishing is business, right? Would I even be able to have a market here? So I kind of struggled with all those things. So while I was still working on Bones, luckily I got in touch with this, but rather they got in touch with me because they're also like Nigerian background, and in the business of promoting African and Nigerian literature here in Canada. So getting the publishing deal with them wasn't as difficult as I had thought it was going to be, because they understood my point of view and my voice, and they're familiar with that kind of storytelling style. I think we need more of them, more publishers here who would be able to take a risk on new voices, on immigrant voices. Otherwise, it's the death of so many careers and the death of so many good books.
Michael, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.